in such high regard, and that when it comes to our way of life and our culture, that we shouldn't be transporting human remains, ashes to the moon, and also the opportunity for them to, because one of the responses I also said that we're born here and we should be left here as well when we move on as well too, because the animals, the insects, the species, the plants were created from Mother Earth, and that's how we should re-enter after we are done here on this short time that we're given to live on this beautiful earth that we call home. And so that was one of the responses that I made. And then in addition to the religion or the culture or our way of life, I believe that we have ceremonies that are completely tied to it. And one of the things that people have told me as well, they should hold our religion, our Navajo culture, to such high regards, and they should have consulted with us. Yes, I definitely do agree. And as the meeting that we just concluded with the different organizations such as the White House, NASA, and the Department of Transportation and all of its entities, as well, was basically just saying the proper tribal consultation should have happened. I know that we should have been notified instead of trying to respond days out, and that's kind of how I consider it. Is that it was days out from the actual launch that we issued the letter, and if we didn't issue the letter, these discussions wouldn't have been happening. And I know that a lot of tribal leaders all across the country are also starting to get wind of the position that we've taken as the Navajo Nation. So the discussion that we kind of concluded was that, as mentioned earlier, the launch is still scheduled for Monday, January 8th. And I did tell them my concern, and kind of basically told them that it's unfair that we're only given days for consideration with launches that definitely go into the atmosphere and into space. I know that planning takes years and months, and that they should have known that human remains were going to be scattered across the moon. And just out of respect, it's just they launch all sorts of things to the moon, and this is one of those things where we feel as a nation, and the stance that they took 30 years ago, in well over 25, 30 years ago, when President Hale was president, the late president. And I believe I was in elementary school, middle school, somewhere around those lines, and the position is still the same. Our land, our culture, our way of life within the four sacred mountains, the way we grow things, we use it as a calendar, and our moon is just so integral in everything that we do, that there should be some respect, some sacredness to the moon. And by having human remains up there constantly floating around the earth, as we continue to exist here on Mother Earth, it's just of concern. And so we're still constantly continuing to seek advice from Navajo traditional practitioners as well, because I know that there's going to be future launches. And one of the requests that I've made to the White House staff and is that they consult us into any future missions that are going to have human remains, so that we don't have days to respond. And even though we were told that this is a private contractor, and NASA and the government really doesn't have that much control over the mission, except for safety and how successful the mission will actually go out into space, other than what is being transmitted is a lot tougher to regulate as well. So definitely, I did mention, NASA being able to have parts of the payload and paying for part of the mission. They should have a lot to say on it. And so into the future, one of the things I want to do is continue to collaborate and work with them as they move on to further missions, to make sure that NASA does have a big say on it. Maybe there's an agreement between tribal nations and the Navajo Nation as well, that if NASA is going to be a part of a mission, then they shouldn't be transporting human remains to the moon, in respect to honoring the promise that NASA made with the Navajo Nation back in the 90s. And the chief of staff reiterated that promise today, and basically said the promise is still the same, that a NASA mission will continue to consult with Navajo and tribes as it moves further on. But my challenge to them was, these missions don't happen without NASA. So if we can come up with something then really try to focus on how can we collaborate and make sure that these future missions don't have human remains, just out of respect for the hundreds of tribes that exist here in the United States as well. So that's kind of the overall the stance that we took, and I'm very happy that sometimes I think people think that tribes will their way of life and their religion and what they hold sacred will continue to wash away. But here on Navajo, we've still got a lot of Navajo traditional practitioners. We still introduce ourselves with our clans. We still hold the four sacred mountains with high regards, our land, our sky, our air, and everything along those lines. But at the same time, trying to maintain a balance as well is what is very critical about being a modern day Navajo, is really trying to figure out how can we continue to be successful as we move along. And my response to the team on the other end too was like, I'm not against, and we're not trying to claim the moon, we're not trying to claim the sky or the universe or anything like that, but you should do it in respect. And what is the most sacred of everything I think about is human life. Human life is very sacred because it's very unique, and we're given an opportunity to develop, think, and really live this wonderful life that we have an opportunity to enjoy. And we're created here, and this is where we should end here as well too. So that's basically what I told them. So we're not trying to stop your missions or your exploration. I get that technology is constantly evolving with exploration such as NASA going into space, the technology that even recently they're able to send a video millions of miles away from back to Earth, high quality video. So those technologies, as I'm sitting here communicating to all of you through video, those things stem from our people constantly trying to push themselves into the next level. But that shouldn't be at the cost of human remains and at the cost of what our Navajo people believe in as well. So there's got to be that strong balance as we move along. So that's the introduction that I want to reiterate from here. And then if there's questions, I'd be more than happy to take those questions. And I know that after this discussion as well too, that Justin will I think he'll send out the documents that we've submitted, not only to the White House, but also as press releases and documents that we have gathered. So you all can have the same information that we have as well too. So thank you so much for tuning in.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. We have a few questions from the press for you. The first question that we have is, can you tell us what the government officials told you? Were there any pledges made to consult with you in the future, or indeed not to allow private companies to take human remains to the moon in the future? The second question is, what is your response to the critique put forward by one of the companies involved, Celestis, that no one group or community should have veto powers over space missions?
When I met with the government officials, they promised to consult. I think that being able to consult into the future is one of the things that they're going to try to work on as they move along. So I'm glad that some of the government officials that work for the administration is really going to try to continue to work with us. I know even the Deputy Chief of Staff of NASA reiterated its promise to make sure that they consult with Navajo, and that this was kind of an oversight, and that they're going to work on being better, which was good. But also at the same time, we were given no reassurance that the human remains were not going to be transported to the moon on Monday. And that was I think that the toughest part to hear is that they're not going to remove the human remains and keep them here on Earth where they were created. But instead, we were just told that a mistake has happened. We're sorry. Into the future, we're going to try to consult with you. But there was no strong affirmative response that said we will work with you to make sure that human remains don't go into space as well. But I believe that the executive order that President Biden reaffirmed, that was initially brought to us by another president from 2000, and really trying to make sure that consultation is meaningful when working with tribes, including celestial bodies like the moon, it needs to happen. So, and then moving on to the second question about how the response of the company saying that no one group or community should have veto power over space missions. To me, this is not about vetoing a space mission. The rockets and missions have been launched over the past 30 years, and the Navajo Nation has never opposed any of that. And we are opposing human remains being spread over the moon, and just out of respect, I think that a lot should have been considered, or what tribes believe all over the 50 states as well. And one of the things I think about is a lot of the things that tribes have said over the decades. We've always tried to continue to advocate that we got to continue to uphold our sacredness of the mountains, the land, the water, and things like that, and just really even come into a world of drought and the weather changes that have been happening over the years now. And I think that's time to really consider other forms of cultures like the Navajo culture. If we say that this is a way of not honoring our way of life, then at least there should be some respect. And it's not only just us; it's just not one group, unless there's over 500 tribes, and every tribe is very distinct. Navajo Nation is not like Cherokee. Navajo Nation is not like the Pueblos or the Hopi or the Apaches. We're very distinct in groups. So I think that it's just not one group. I think it's hundreds of our tribal nations that will stand with us, and that doesn't include other indigenous peoples that represent the entire world as well. So I think that the comment of vetoing the space mission is a misconception. All we're saying is it's a simply remove some of the cargo and continue on with your mission, and as well. And then I think those are the two questions.
Yes,
Justin.
sir. The next question that we have is, can you explain why the moon is sacred and how sending cremated remains to the moon is a desecration of this sacred space?
I think that's going to be a really tough one, because when we trying to explain to people that are not Navajo or that are not familiar with our ceremonies, there's all different types of night ceremonies. There's that involve the moon. Old J is the name in Navajo, and that there's just so many things that are tied to it, that to us it's really trying to making sure, because what's sacred is us as human beings, and then the celestial things like the moon that people use in their ceremonies. And as we continue to build upon meeting with traditional practitioners, a lot of them share the same sentiment that, you know what, there's uh, just like the way you could also argue how is the Bible sacred, how are words sacred, how is reading a book sacred. It's hard to explain, but the more and more you look into different avenues of what sacredness means, it's very distinct to different groups, especially Native American groups. We hold mountains, the sun, the moon, in different high regards of sacredness. And I think that I know that even recent over the years of arguments of over the mountain in Flagstaff, having the snow bowl and the types of water that flow down the mountain now, and so a lot of people don't really truly understand some of those things, but there's certain things that we continue to make sure that there's a strong balance. And I think that the issue has always just been sending human remains to the moon, and we should have at least been consulted. And I think that there's two parts to this. One is both any groups can argue that's not enough, that isn't enough of a reason that Navajo people hold that the moon to such high sacredness. And then there's also the other part that people will argue is, why should the Navajo Nation be consulted? Well, it was written and a promise was given that says we will consult with the Navajo Nation next time we do this. And this will be the second time that's happened. When it does happen, possibly on Monday, and that the last time that it did happen, we were promised to be consulted, and that did not happen. And the other thing I think about is that executive orders have been written. The government said they promised to consult with us and really do making sure that the Navajo Nation's input is there as well too. So next question, Justin.
Yes, sir. So the next question that we have is, how do you feel about the response from the White House and NASA today? Was it enough?
I think the response to me felt like, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the discussion, was I felt like we were just going through. I had a feeling going into the discussion that they were not going to remove the human remains, that they were going to reiterate policies that are in place that are not going to stop the mission, as mentioned, that the mission is safe to launch and that it's the safety of the mission is good to go. And they didn't go into too much details of why that human remains shouldn't be transported as well too. So I think that it was a way for them to just listen, hear us out. And to me, I wish there was a firm response today. I know that we're going to continue to have those discussions with them into the future. I know that there's another mission that I was informed of that will possibly have human remains into the future. So we've got months to prepare on this end to work with other tribes. So we're looking forward to getting other tribes on board so that it's not just the Navajo Nation and it doesn't look like we're the only ones trying to stop missions to the moon as well, because I know if as a Navajo person and as just as a human being and a part of this great country, we're not trying to say don't do exploration, don't go to the moon, and don't do those types of scenarios. All we're just saying is this is the one part that we feel like there should be some sacredness to it. There's some sacredness to being born, being made, and going into when our journey is done here on Earth. Those are probably the two most prominent things that we can think about that have continued to exist here on Earth since human beings have walked this Earth. So that's one of the things I want to make very clear, that I have not said that we're opposing missions to the moon and the exploration, because when technology is constantly improved and discoveries are made, because the people are making leaps and faiths of trying to advance technologies. And to me, I feel like we shouldn't be. You're not making leaps and bounds by transporting human remains and scattering them over a sacred celestial being like the moon. To me, that's not pushing science. That's not pushing technology. I think that in respect to that, as a nation, as president of the Navajo Nation, I'm all for technology, all for modern day technology to really help us improve our everyday lives, and that comes from pushing the envelope of curiosity.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next question is, can you talk about other tribes that have joined you in this effort? Were there similar pledges made by the other tribes regarding transporting of human remains? And I think this is in reference to the Coalition of Large Tribes letter that went out. Your remarks on that?
Yes, I think as this topic is continuing to be discussed all over the country and the world this week and last week, I think that there a lot. I really see. I'm happy that the coalition of large tribes have come together and supported our efforts. And there's going to be more tribes. I know that we're going to have one of the Pueblo tribes on the phone call today to help us and support us. But I think that's one of the things that we can, as tribal nations, will continue to build that alliance on specifically on this. So I know that the other tribes, I'm glad that they're coming on board as the talks continue to happen. We will continue to make sure that we're moving along as well. So again, I think as we move along, I don't see any pushback from other tribes, and I just think that it's just that one area that I think that tribes will be very supportive, because the thoughts of human ashes being floating around the earth on a day-to-day basis is a thought that I think will scare a lot of traditional practitioners.
And sir, is the Navajo Nation okay with other types of moon explorations? Countries around the world are planning moon missions, and NASA is planning um, a sustained human presence on the moon. Are these activities okay, or is just sending cremated remains that conflict with the Navajo Nation's beliefs? And no, I can add on to it after you're done, sir.
Okay, I think that I answered that question earlier, that we're not opposing space exploration, and I think the only thing we're opposing is definitely human remains being scattered on the moon. And yeah.
Yes, sir. And to just add to that, I think it's a broader policy discussion as to whether or not the United States has affirmative action to actually protect sacred sites, as they have continued to express through the memorandums of understanding and the executive orders that are going out, but also looking at the fact that um, when these non-commercial companies send their rockets into space and they deliver these specific payloads to the moon, there's no way to actually bring that back. So we're unable to bring back the equipment or anything like that. So essentially, what is happening is the moon is turning into both a graveyard and a waste site because you know there's just no way to bring things back. So you know, comparing it to other sacred areas, we wouldn't do this to the Grand Canyon. We wouldn't do this to other spaces. So why would we do it to the moon? So just to go off of that, and then, sir, I know you have to go, but the last question that we'll ask, and I can answer the other questions after you leave. Have you received feedback from the Navajo people? What have they expressed to you?
I think as this discussion has started to, again, since the letter has gone out and the news has hit national news, a lot of people have called our office, and traditional practitioners are really reaching out to us and it's really supporting our efforts. So again, that's one of the things I've also asked my team too, is to continue to chat with our Navajo people, our traditional practitioners, to get their opinion and continue to gather information and thoughts as well as we move forward, because this is probably not as this discussion is going to happen, is we're going to make sure that when happens next time, as NASA hopefully when they say that the next time this is going to be talked about, they said it in the 90s and they said it again today, but my hope is that they really are serious, that if human remains are on board, then they really should consult with the Navajo Nation and tribes as well. But in the meantime, we will build an even stronger case for that, because as I mentioned the NASA earlier today, when they said, hey, it's hard for us to control what private contractors are doing, I reiterated to them that these private contractors are not going to go on these missions without the partnership of NASA. As I was told, that half of the payload that's going up into space is NASA payload that's going up on January 8th, which is Monday. So my response to them is, you have a lot of influence. So we've got time to sit down and really build a strong case to support tribes and the sacredness of the moon that they all hold dear to their hearts for their people and their communities.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. President, for taking the time to join us today. I know that you do have to leave, but I will stay on the line and answer any more questions from the press. So thank you, sir. Okay, so
Thank you. I'll go on it.
So to answer some of the other questions, so I'm going to go back up to the list. So one of the questions that was asked is the remains have been sent to space for many years, and can you talk about how that has impacted traditional practices, considering, as you said, that ashes are floating around out there? So um, I think we got to go back to what it is yes, the remains have been sent into space, but they haven't touched the moon. The only person's remains who have touched the moon was Eugene Shoemaker in 1998. And since then, nobody else has been able to be up there up until this upcoming Monday. Um, you know, there's levels of desecration. There are levels that we consider. Um, but as the president had stated, there are many different ceremonies that involve the moon itself, and if there are 60 plus bodies that are cremated remains that are going up to the moon, um, at what point are you suggesting are we going to be praying to a graveyard? And I think that's the bigger issue here. Additionally, as we again look at the broader policy context of things, is FAA and NASA have essentially said that they don't have any regulations over what is being sent into space, and private companies can essentially send whatever, which is very problematic, as long as it doesn't pose a public health risk, is how they framed it. So, it's very problematic, and this needs additional consultation with tribes. The White House had indicated that the Space Council had a framework that was developed, and there was public comment on it. But we have reiterated, public comment is not tribal consultation. Public comment, there are hundreds and hundreds of Federal Register notices that are published daily, and it's not the same as consulting with tribes. Tribal consultation requires several steps. One is issuing a Dear Tribal Leader letter and making sure that tribes know that they are specifically being consulted on matters that affect them. So just because something is listed in the public register doesn't necessarily mean that it is actual meaningful consultation. Some of the other questions that were asked is, when did the White House reach out to speak with us? So we received a response from the White House on Wednesday. The initial meeting was supposed to be scheduled for yesterday, and the meeting, unfortunately, was unable to be scheduled, which then moved it to today, and we did have that meeting. The next question was, has the Navajo Nation had any conversation about remains being sent to the moon since the original 1998 incident? Um, the question is no. And that's because NASA had promised that if something were to happen like this again, that they would consult with us. And as we heard the president, that unfortunately wasn't the case. And even though this is a launch that is not sponsored by NASA, NASA is a significant stakeholder in this, and we feel that they should have had an obligation to inform us that this company was sending cremated human remains to the moon. So with that, as we had the discussions earlier, one of the questions that we had posed to NASA was, in the future, would you be willing to look at who you're contracting with, and as president, part of the Biden administration's commitment to preserving sacred sites and doing anything that they can, if they are contracting out these services, would one of those requirements be that on a condition of accepting our um, grant or our contract, you won't send human remains as part of your payloads. So again, there's a broader policy discussion that we're looking into, but it probably will take a series of consultations, and we have asked the White House, who said that they would get back to us on whether or not there would be specific consultation regarding this matter. Um, and as the president stated, this is not us trying to claim the moon. This is us trying to preserve the sacred space, as we would any other sacred site, the Grand Canyon, the Bears Ears, other different monuments and structures that we all would deem holy. It's kind of like going into church and leaving a lot of equipment in the church. I'm sure the church wouldn't like that very much. So at the same time, we were asking for that same respect for the moon. And then I think one of the last follow-up questions here was, do you find NASA's response saying that them not being responsible inadequate? After all, they are the main client of Astrobotics and paid more than 100 million, and without them, the mission wouldn't be happening. And that goes back to the comment that I made earlier. NASA, as a key stakeholder, should have some sort of influence on what is being allowed into space, and the lack of regulatory oversight on this. The government really needs to step up and identify ways to protect the interest of preserving sacred spaces, but also making sure that it aligns with the broader principles of tribal consultation in that regard. Um, And, going back to Celestis's response to the Navajo Nation, absolutely, no one group or community should have veto power. So, I mean, going kind of using that same logic, what gives them the right to disregard, over 1 million people's cultural and religious practices, just to send the remains of the wealthy? And I think that's a good question that I'd like to get them to respond to. um, this is not a matter of religion, it's about respect. Navajos and indigenous people have been practicing their traditions and customs for thousands of years. And to my knowledge, there is no one religion in the world that says to send your cremated remains or to send your loved ones to the moon to be buried. So, on that front, I'm hoping that there will be a reflection on what it means to actually preserve and respect people's cultural practices and religions. And again, a lot of people like to group Native Americans as one community, and as the president had indicated, there are over 500 federally recognized tribes. There's well over, in addition to that, there's state recognized tribes. And then globally, there are indigenous people in certain regions who all practice different cultures and aspects and religions. So it's not just one religion, it's just not one community. It's, hundreds and communities and millions of people who are going to be potentially affected by this. I don't see any other questions in the queue. Does anyone have any last minute questions for the Navajo Nation? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today's press conference. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. You can reach us at info@nnwo.org. All right, yeah, thank you.